Chemical Consultants welcome everybody. Chemical Consultants Network is a non-profit organization of about 200 consultants, namely chemists, chemical engineers, life scientists, and other interested scientists and engineers of other allied chemical allied disciplines. We hold monthly meetings on topics of interest to consultants to help start, practice, and enhance opportunities in consulting. Our meetings cover common issues such as taxes, regulatory compliance, safety, and technical developments in science and technology. Through our website, we provide a platform to advertise our members to potential clients within their areas of expertise. We are supported by the Philadelphia section of the American Chemical Society and the American Institute of Chemical Engineers. Welcome new members and welcome people who have not been around for the past couple of meetings. Now, let me introduce to us the speaker. The principal, John Fetzer, is a recognized world-class expert in the chemistry and analysis of polycyclic aromatic compounds. He's a specialist in development of separation methods aimed particularly at crude oil, its distillate fractions, including asphalt and residuum, chemical processed petroleum products such as waxes, mineral oils, lube oil, base stocks, fuels, and intermediate oils, petrochemical products, and additives. He has a high level of expertise in high-performance liquids, supercritical fluids, gel permeation, gas chromatographies, fluorescence, and UV absorbance measurements. And today he's going to be talking to us about consulting in a tough global economy. John?
Good evening, everybody. Sorry for the problems. I'm going to be talking about my experiences and that of a few others. It's sort of an evolved talk that I first gave a few of the slides at American Chemical Society national meeting that had a focus on consulting practices and how to build them. I've since added on and changed a lot of the slides, but getting started, I basically am doing consulting after about, it's now 22 years. What I started doing was basically offering what I had been doing when I worked for a major oil company. And they were my first clients because there were some projects that needed continuation and finishing. I was offered a package after they had a big merger, and they basically said, you're going to be going anyway, and because they had a huge required cut to make in people. So I started doing some work for them and then looking around and learned a lot of things about what is needed in the consulting world. That was the beginning. I had targeted clients, companies that were doing similar work to what the things I've been doing at that point in my chemist career. One of the things in looking for consulting work is I saw a lot of needs for topical areas of things that I had done 5, 10, 15, 20 years earlier. And in looking at those, I found that the level of expertise that I and most consultants would have hadn't changed in many cases enough to be daunting, because if you understand a lot of the basics and have done some problem solving, you have a good portion of what companies are looking for, and it's just getting up to speed on specifics. And so I started broadening the things that I offered. Early on, I had a rudimentary web page, and I'll talk about web pages a little later on. But having a web page or some online access of that sort is key because that's the way everybody looks now. In general, they may look at a search on LinkedIn and a few other things that weren't around 22 years ago, but it's good to have a presence as on your own kind of web page. You have to remember that what you can do now is not just what you've done before. And the before in most people's mind, as I said, is recent. At the time I left Chevron, I had done a lot of work on separation of additives, fuel additives, and lubricating oil additives, characterization of some products, particularly lubricating oils, asphalts, and crude oils. And so I kind of narrowed what I was, when I first started doing this, the thinking of what I could offer. And that was initially a mistake. Technical expertise and consulting experiences are not static, and you do have to work at it in gaining more, and I'll touch on that and what I did. And every project that you work on becomes then something else that you can offer. And that is also one thing that over the years I've gotten into a lot of areas because of that. Why must you diversify? Basically because there are a lot of companies out there and they have specific problems. Unless your expertise or what you're offering that they see sounds good for their specific problem, they may pass over you. And even though you may be a good fit, if you're not describing all the things that you may be able to do, they're going to pass you. But with the search engines that are going on and listing services and things of that sort, there are things available now that weren't available 22 years ago. One of the biggest things that I learned is that you don't work a 9 to 5, 40-hour work. You work whatever is necessary, particularly as far as timing. When you go global, you have to deal with time zones, and I'll touch on some of those, that and some other issues when I talk about working internationally. But you really have to change, because after years and years of working for companies, you're going to have in your mindset that you work certain hours, certain times, and it turns out that there are many differences that are necessary and possible, particularly when you're going global. There are parts of the world where a Monday to Friday schedule is not what is going on. And then when you throw in time zones, differences, that just makes it even more complicated. I have since, as I put down here, done work for companies all over North America, Europe, quite a bit of work in the Middle East, and in East Asia and South Asia. These are some of the areas that I'd worked on, the last bit of work that Yeah.
John, sorry to interrupt. This is Keith Wing. I'm helping to run your slides.
Okay,
Are you still
I need to. No, I need to. I forget. I need to go on there. I am on ready for slide. I'm on slide 4, ready to go to 5. Okay.
Okay, you got to tell me when.
Yeah, I forgot because I was trying to figure out. I've said all that's on the slides, but basically it's a long intro. On slide 5, I basically worked on some things my last few years at Chevron, some very specific that were needed, like the aqueous solubilities and water octanol water coefficients are key in environmental analysis. And so there was some demand in that. But as I said, you have to broaden your work. And these were fairly narrow. And even though I had a lot of reputation in areas like HPLC and fluorescence and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, there aren't that many jobs at any given time in those. And, you know, and in consulting, I had to learn and get used to the sporadic nature of it. Next slide. Networking, which I had done all along, was good. And you should really use networks. I actually got into one area where I really focused on this. About 3 years after I started consulting, I was asked to start writing a career management for chemists monthly column for one of the major journals. And that's when I really got good at networking, because I checked in and read a lot of articles on it. I will give you some of the highlights right now. One is networking is not just looking for things for yourself. It's whenever you run across anything that may be useful to someone in your network, pass it on, whether it's information, research article, and you should do that all along. So you have a dynamic, positive network where people are willing to help you when you say you need help. The analogy I used when I was teaching classes and training in career management was, no one likes the neighbor who is always knocking on the door and asking to borrow things. And when you ask for something, they don't have it or they don't loan it to you. So you don't want that in your networking. And that's a very important hint, because if you have that collegiality and connection with your network, then work comes your way, because when something pops up to one of your network, they will start thinking of you. I assessed my skills inventory, and that included going back over my full career, which was about 22 years of industrial work, as well as grad school, because there are some things that I actually did in grad school, like supercritical fluid extraction, that were marketable. And so in assessing my skills network, and that included technical and non-technical things, I had a lot more to offer. And on my web pages or any of the contact information that I had because I prepared some initial documents that were basically a description of my consulting. So when I was contacted, I could email people a document that said, here's all the things I do. That got to be a page or so of just highlights of different things I do. But you really need to look at your skills fully to increase your opportunities. Next slide. This is just an idea, and this comes from actually a book I wrote for Springer that came out of my career management articles. And it's basically, you have to look at all the things you can do and decide what directions you're going to go in. And it's very enlightening. It was for me, and I think it is for most people that I've coached. You end up knowing a lot more than you think you do. And when you start offering it, there are very often responses, at least nibbles of interest, and then you can go from there. Next slide. These are just some of the questions that I coach people and say you should ask. there are some differences than what most people do. In the second one, minor job experiences and what you think is minor job skills, something that may only be 5 or 10% of the work you did, and it might have only been for a time period like 5 to 7 years ago, may be marketable. And you have to assess that. And when you broadcast your skills, some of those things will get some responses. As I said, I ended up teaching things like time management and giving courses for that at companies. How to prioritize and organize work. So the skills in operating projects, and those gained quite a bit of response, particularly where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and a lot of the high-tech companies and startups had some interest in that. And I did one actually in the town I live in is where Biorad is located. And I did some work of that sort for them. Originally, I wouldn't have even thought of doing anything of that sort. Next slide. One of the mindsets that you do definitely have to change if you've been working in the industry and you're no longer doing it, is you have to start being a boss and you're working for yourself. That's a lot of different changes, both in how you promote yourself, how you have to learn to manage all the aspects, because there are business things. You have to decide whether you want liability insurance, things of that sort. So it does take some time to run the operation. You have to get good at things like understanding estimated taxes and the requirements for doing that. If you do go global, and I'll touch on this, you have to understand the tax situations in other countries and how they impact on U.S. taxes. And I'll touch on that because U.S. taxes are unique as far as foreign work compared to every other country in the world. As I said, diversify and do that. It can be very interesting, and I'll touch on those. I'll get into some of the specific areas that I got into, like expert witnessing, very shortly. It also was interesting in some things in that by advertising and being out there listed as expert in certain things, I actually had one project.
Can you pause for a second, please?
Okay.
Your presentation on my laptop, it won't advance. I'm trying to get it to advance. Let me see. Let me exit. I don't know why. And also, let's see. Hold on, just hold on for a second.
And when he gets
Joanne, should I stop share and then share again? Maybe that'll fix it.
That's what I would do. Yes. And then when he brings the presentation back up, John, if you could just tell him exactly which slide, tell him what's at the top.
Yeah,
of the
I'm
slide.
on slide 10. I'm on slide
And that's
10
one
right
that's
now.
just diversifying.
Your slides don't have numbers on them, so you have to like really be explicit.
I'm going on the one that's built into this one's headed diversifying in a light red or sort of a
What's the
orangey
next
red.
line? Diversifying the science you do now. The science you
Let's
do.
see. I have two that are called diversifying, and they come after a picture of a cartoon picture of a man with a stack of books.
I can't get your slide deck to advance. I don't know why. It was advancing before.
Let me give it a try from my side. I might be able to do it. If you could stop sharing, I'll try to do it from this side.
All right.
The document, you might be able to like export it as PDF and then just view that instead of actually a slide show in PowerPoint or whatever, possibly.
Do you see a slide right now
Because
that
it'd be
says diversifying?
it says diversifying. It's in edit mode.
Yeah, I may just leave it here because we're having trouble with it.
Yeah, it might be better.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the one that said the service you do now is the first line in yellow.
The sign to do now?
Yeah,
Okay.
the science you do now is what it
Okay.
says.
And the last point I wanted to make was just an interesting sort of anecdotal thing. I did some work while I was at Chevron on one of their subsidiaries called American Gilsonite, and they mine a very heavy carbonaceous material. It's not coal. It's a lot more glassy. It's sort of like a glassy asphalt kind of material. I did polycyclic analysis for them probably in the late 1980s and wrote a report. Later on, Chevron sold that company and was diversified through diversification or diversification, and they went on their own way. They contacted me about, I'd say about 2015 or so, and said, we have this report, and all they had was somebody had copied the technical part, which is the tables and how the work had been done, and didn't have anything about me doing it and that I had written it. And they wanted to have someone verify those numbers. And I explained to them, and then they hired me to use one of the contract labs that I worked for to redo those analysis exactly as I'd done, 30 years before, and send them to them. And it was just because I'd been advertising out there as an expert in the analysis of heavy hydrocarbon materials, particularly for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and they found me listed somewhere. And I made, $10,000 or so easy just by redoing my own work. That's how quirky the search things may be these days, if you are listed well. Next slide. The science you do now is not the science everyone does now. And you have to remind yourself that, particularly if you've been working and you have skills that are on the higher end, a lot of companies are starting much lower, and they may be using techniques that are a year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years old. And so you have to step back sometime and get in sync with them so that you are helping them come up to speed, and you can offer to help them do that. What is out there in the industrial world is often not state of the art, to say the least. And that was an adjustment for me because I worked in a huge research center. All my contacts around the world were, I would say, very capable scientists. And so my impression of what was going on in the industrial world was not what was really going on. And I had to gear back. And that was the learning that made my interactions with companies initially much more productive, and laid the groundwork, for example, to not only solve their immediate problem, but lay them forward to them proposals on how to get them to do better work that would answer their questions better. So it was generating more work for me by helping them do their business better. And that was, as I said, a real learning experience. One of the things that you really have to work for, and I learned this when I was doing my career management, chemists and laboratory scientists in general are not good at people skills. If laboratory chemists take Myers-Briggs personality typing, there are 16 Myers-Briggs personality typing. There are 4 vectors, and you're either strong or weak in those 4. So they come up with 16 personality types. In the work that I did at Chevron, we were, since I was a laboratory supervisor, I had to train in it so I could supervise people better. And I found that almost everyone in my organization, of about 50 or more analytical chemists, 80% of them were in one of those Myers-Briggs categories, INTJ. The people were very close. They were 3 out of 4, and the one that was not usually very strong. They were leaning towards J or T or N or I. That was an eye-opener for me in that I didn't really understand Myers-Briggs as well as I do now. It also made it easier to do consulting, because when I started looking at personality typing versus occupation, I found out that attorneys are a quite different personality type, which explained a lot of my experience with things like patent attorneys when I was a working chemist. It also helped when I do expert witness work to understand why attorneys do things the way they do. I'll touch on that a little more when I get into expert witnessing, but basically some of the big areas are chemists are broader picture. We like to see the overall view and then focus down a little more on sets of generalities that describe the parts of science that we're dealing with. But we are broad perspective people by nature. That's how our minds work. Attorneys are very detailed focused. Everything in their world is in details, and very critically, it is in black and white. It is either a yes or a no. It is within some area or not. And so when you're dealing with attorneys and the way they ask you things and everything, if you start understanding their personalities, the likely personality that made them fit and do well as an attorney, you will do a better job as an expert witness. The same is true of if you're dealing with business types and marketing types. They have a certain general personality type, or at least of those 16, they have clusters. That can be quite different than science. And that was a big learning in my consulting. Fortunately, it happened only a few years after I started. And so I started applying that with my interactions with potential clients. I deal with attorneys very differently than I deal with when I'm contacted by someone with a chemical engineering or chemistry background from a chemistry company, because the thinking in those two kinds of people are very different. Collaboration is possible with other consultants. So as you work and build, if you find out through groups like Chemical Consultants Network or others, then if the opportunity arises with a project, you can say, I know someone that is really strong in these areas and that can help. And then you have a better team to answer the client's questions or solve their problems. And that's something that I didn't do much early on. I didn't know that many people, but now as part of my networking, I've learned a lot. Even when I'm contacted and I'm not a good fit, part of my networking is passing things on.
John, can you tell us which slide you're on,
Yeah.
please?
I am on 11. That's collaborating, and the first word is the science you do now.
Okay, I moved back, but okay, got it.
Okay, the next slide is the technical consultant, and I'm going to go into various areas that people do. This is the natural one that everybody goes into. They're scientists and they say, I can offer science. And that's what this is about. And it's pretty self-explanatory to a group of chemical consultants. You basically know a certain area of chemistry, a certain area of applications of that. And that's what you naturally think your consulting business is going to do. You set boundaries for yourself, and that isn't necessarily what the companies out there with problems are looking for. They may be looking for other skills, other talents that you have, or other scientific areas that you don't grab onto immediately when you think of your strengths, and you're a good fit and you can help them solve their problem. And so the first thing is you have to decide whether you're going to limit yourself into only doing scientific consulting. And I'm going to go into others. Next slide. With the technical consulting, and this is aimed at people starting, you need resources. You need access to books and journals. I had a large number myself, just from my own work. I probably had 150 that I had with me, and now the number of scientific books I have around available to me, probably well over, I'd say well over 250, maybe 300, maybe more. I also have access to journals through membership in the American Chemical Society, things like that. And so those are things that you have to be aware of. If you haven't done literature searches very much in the science other than chem abstracts, there are other things out there, like Scopus is offered by Elsevier. And it is a paid for subscription. But if you do review articles for Elsevier, they give you it for free for a certain time period. I do several journals for Elsevier, so I'm generally have access to Scopus, and I use it when I need it, if I have access. So there are opportunities for you to have these. I also am fortunate that I'm located near University of California, Berkeley, and I go down to their library when I need to see all the things that they do. And so I have a lot of resources, and they help in doing my work. Next slide gets into expert witnessing, and it's a brief overview. The first thing I found in my experience is that expert means something different in the legal field. We think of as scientists, expert as someone in the very top portion of the kind of work we do, the top 5 or 10 or 15% or something like that. Someone who is recognized by the rest of people that kind of work as publishing a lot, writing books, giving talks at conferences, those kinds of things. In the legal world, expert just means that you have average knowledge of someone doing that work. And that is a huge difference. That means if you are somewhere in the top half, you should be comfortable being an expert witness. And the higher up you are, yes, you're going to do a better job at being an expert witness. But if you do a self-assessment and say, well, I'm somewhere in the top 25%, but I'm not an expert, you are a very good legal expert in that topic. And that was a learning in what I offered. Some of the expert witnesses that I have gone up against were almost neophytes. They had done a little work and had average knowledge. In some cases, it was so severe, I actually had, in one case, an attorney put in a motion that I really wasn't an expert under that definition because I was a world-class leader. The judge laughed. I was told by the attorney that I was working with that the judge laughed at that and just threw that motion out. But there is that huge difference. And so for those of you who have ever thought of expert witnessing and have been daunted by that word expert, do not be. It doesn't mean the same thing. Things that I did that are necessary, having a full CV with all the things that inform what you know about, what you've published, is very valuable, because a full CV that lists all your publications, book chapters, everything, is admissible and is usually admitted as evidence of your expertise. And even though you or your attorney in depositions or in all the motions that lead up to the trial may not highlight an area that you are expert in just because of the flow of the case, if it is in your CV, you have 2 or 3 publications in it, you are considered an expert. I actually had one case in environmental analysis where one of the experts on the other side was giving some NMR expertise, and my attorney had not stated that I was an NMR expert. But in my CV, I had 3 publications that in the title said they were NMR related. The judge ruled against our side. It got appealed, and the California Supreme Court overruled and said it is obvious from what is within my CV that I know about NMR because I had published. And they overruled, and so the client, my attorney, was representing one. So a CV is very useful. It is part and parcel of what attorneys deal with. And so you need to go and create one. Attorneys still use faxes. And this is an antiquated thing by choice, because by laws, things that are on electronic form, like emails and such, are admissible as testimony. And for whatever reason, things that are sent by fax are not. And so until probably 2 or 3 years ago, I had a fax. I still do it now by a fax program through my computer so that it operates and falls under that. But that's one of the quirks of if you do a lot of expert witnessing, you may be called upon to fax things. It's just one of those quirks. Next slide. Rates. I offer 2 tiered rates of technical consulting at a certain amount, and I have always. And then with expert witnessing, because it takes different skills, it particularly takes communication skills of being able to write well and speak well, and to be able to read a lot of material and gather the pertinent information that's useful for the case that you're dealing with. So I charge more for that. Attorneys just accept that fact. Some attorneys initially will only want you for your technical expertise, seeing whether the science fits their case or suits their case. And others say, no, I don't want to be bothered by that, and they'll just start at the expert witness level. I do charge travel routinely, and just for myself, I have a cap on it of 1 day, a day, or 8-hour days worth per day of travel at half rate. But it guarantees that the time I'm spending travel is covered because it's taking me away from business. And that's in general for my consulting practice, but attorneys take that into stride. And so if you don't do that in your expert witnessing, you're losing a chance to make some more money. Retainer was a learning that I had very early. I actually had 2 attorneys on different cases contact me. We went through all the discussions, created contracts, and they were in place. One gave me about an hour's worth of reading to do. The other gave me about 2. And after that, I went and around to the network of experts that I went with and said, that was kind of odd. What do you think was going on? And the answer I think that we came up with is that some unscrupulous lawyers will scour the available expert witnesses in a topical area and put them under contract. As soon as they are under contract and do work, they are not available to anyone else. So even if you want to cancel the contract because there is no work, it's still on the books. Some attorneys may do that, not for the current case that they're talking about or whatever they're talking about, but you may have a conflict of interest just by being hired on one case by a law firm and any other case in the future that that law firm works in, and needing an expert witness. There are all kinds of things that go on among attorneys trying to exclude expert witnesses because of conflicts of interest. I put in a retainer of, let's see, it's now 4 hours worth of work, which ends up being enough of an amount that it daunts most attorneys to not play that game. At least I haven't had that occur since I started doing that. But that was just some learning. I had 2 of those within my first 3 or 4 years of being expert witness, and I haven't had one since. Next slide.
John, can I interrupt you for a second? We have a question about this topic. Do you want to take the questions?
Sure, I can take it.
Or do you want to take it now? Okay, the question is from Douglas Lamb. It says, my experience in expert witness teaches that working for both plaintiffs and defendants is somewhat unethical. Please comment.
No. Well, it depends on what you mean. You cannot work for of course you cannot do that on the same case, but you do want to avoid the situation where all you work for is plaintiffs or defendants, because the opposing side may point out that you are an ambulance chaser type expert witness, that you are signed on by defendants, let's say in environmental pollution cases, And let's say one side is environmental groups that are raising it or government agencies. And if all that's worked for someone working for a company will say, well, this expert witness is biased. All he represents. And that's one of the games that attorneys play. If you have that kind of variety, on mine, I have somewhere 60-40 probably breakdown, somewhere between that, maybe 1/3, 2/3. But in deposition, it comes up. Have you ever done any work in this area before? And was it for plaintiffs? Was it for defendants? If I have worked for both types, it usually doesn't raise much. If by happenstance I've only done one case in it and it was for plaintiffs, or if I've done two cases and it was for defendants, they start asking me just to try and raise the point of showing that I am a biased expert. And so that I would say, no, you don't want to do that if you're going to be serious at doing expert witness work. I've been retained over the course. I've been doing expert witness work for now. My first one was in 2004. And I've probably been retained 50 or 60 times. And as far as going the strong route of actually having been deposed or submitting an expert report or giving trial testimony, that's probably up to about 15. And as I said, they're a mixture on most topical areas, like patent infringements and things of that sort. I would suggest that you try and get some variety and not turn down one side or the other. For me, it also goes with fit of my expertise. If I'm a good fit and I see that their case is what I can go with, the science supports it, I will go with that side. And I will honestly tell the other side, we'll tell an attorney if they contact me and need an expert, I will say your case is not very strong, and I don't think I could work for you. They will, in that case, may retain me just so they can file and know where they are as far as the strengths and weaknesses of their case. And then they can go back to their client with a good argument of why they need to settle. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. Contract lab work is something I've gotten into a few times. And it's when someone sees that I do certain types of consulting work and they say, would you be interested in working for 3 months, 6 months, whatever, particularly if it's some kind of developmental thing, or helping out a company do the developmental thing. So I actually have worked for an oil company, a startup biotech company, and a startup biofuels company, not as a consultant, but as a contracted worker on a salary. It's just something that some companies prefer. I will say it can be lucrative. I worked for one of the startups, and this was now 15 years ago. I was making $95,000 a year, so I worked for him for a year. I was also, as part of the contract, able to continue my consulting work, and so I was in my own time. I was doing a lot of other things, or able to fit some other things in. So I made quite a bit of money that year just by doing what the company preferred, being a contract worker. Next slide. Usually contract workers do not have benefits, but when you're a consultant or in this independent role, those are not necessarily issues because you're probably having to take care of those things like health insurance on your own. But that can be an issue for some people. As I said on the previous slide, you can continue doing other work outside those working hours as long as there is no conflict of interest. Next slide. Now we get into the going global part, and these are just a few of the slides of places that I've done work with or where the companies were. Amsterdam, Dubai, or the United Arab Emirates, Denmark, Saudi Arabia is the desert plant on the lower left. And at this point, I can't remember what the other one is. I think that's in Germany. But you get the opportunity of interacting with people all over, and quite often trips to their facilities or their operations, and that can be interesting and in itself. You get exposed to cultural differences, which are both part of the work and interesting to me as an individual. Next slide. This is some of the specifics about going global. I think the picture is from, might be from India, either Mumbai. I think it might be a scene I found in Mumbai that I found interesting. I actually did some work for an Indian company for a while. The internet is your best multinational employee, meaning it is something you can use to make yourself both useful and known. People all over the world are looking and doing searches for expertise, both technical. I'll touch on in a bit. Training is one area that I've done a lot of work on, because even though they're doing technical work, they may not need a scientist, but they need to bring certain of their employees up to speed in how to do things like HPLC, good laboratory practices, spectroscopy, some of the areas I had expertise in. And so companies will have had me put together short courses, and I come over for a few days or a week or two, and I train their people. That can be quite lucrative. I've actually had years in a period from about 2008 to 2017. I probably made $250,000. No, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I would say $300,000 in doing training overseas. And so it was crazy some of those years. I flew probably 200,000 miles one year because I was going overseas about once a month. But it was lucrative because doing training, you can charge, depending on the company and their needs, $1,000, $2,000. I think the most I ever got offered, and I didn't put it out there, but a company said, we will pay you $4,000 a day. So training globally is very lucrative, and I'll get into that in a bit, but that's just another example of things are different in other parts of the world. Training in the U.S. is not as important because there are generally available resources to do that all over the country because we are so technologically diverse and advanced. When you talk about the Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia, they do not have that advantage, and they are used to bringing in talent, particularly in the Middle East. I rode a wave of that essentially where I was going to Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, the various oil-rich companies or countries, because they had employees, nationals from those countries that they wanted to bring up to speed and do the work. Previously, they were bringing in foreign workers to be the chemists in their labs, and over the last 10 to 15 years, they've been shifting over, so there's been a need for on-site training. Next slide. One of the mechanics, you have to make sure that your schedule is open, wider than just the 8-hour day. Clients in Europe are typically, in my case, since I'm on the West Coast, 6 or 8 hours difference. If you're on the East Coast, it may only be 3, but that's an adjustment. But you can, do that and have virtual meetings and things of that sort. If they are further time zones away, you may do things in the early hours of the morning or in the evening, but it is doable if necessary. You just have to get used to that idea. But it can be really useful in working with foreign clients. Passports and visa requirements are something you have to be up on. They are changing all the time. And it is good to have an up-to-date passport so that you can, if you are approached to do international work, you can say, oh, I'm ready to go. Once I also started doing a lot of international work, there are variations on passports. I got one that has many more pages just so I didn't have to renew as often. Because if you fill up a passport, you need to get a new one. And so the normal passports are not useful enough if you're going to do a lot of foreign work. The last one I'll touch on, and I'll go on more, is there are a lot of things in business practice that are business etiquette is different, and that may be handy. It makes a good impression, and I'll touch on this in further just about when you're traveling in other countries. If you understand what is the norm in the other countries and practice that, you will make a very good impression. I first learned this with Japanese business people, and it was actually when I worked for Chevron, and a large group of Japanese business people came, and exchanging business cards is very important in Japanese business. Unlike Americans who just hand they have their cards and hand them over. Typically, you just have one in your hand and you just give it to the person. Japanese formal practice in giving out business cards is that you take it in both hands. So in the upper, you hold it with the upper 2 corners with the print facing the person you're giving it to, and you give a slight bow. I did that with the Japanese business people, and you could just see the look of surprise. And instantly they said, this is a good guy. I mean, and from then on, in interacting with these Japanese people that were visiting Chevron's research facility, they were very open with me. They were very positive, and of the various scientists that they were dealing with, because there were a team of us. They were coming to ask me questions and clarify things, because they knew I was not going to be judgmental. I understood Japanese behavior better, just from that one act of understanding how to pass out business cards. So those of you ever going to Japan or dealing with Japanese business people can use that trick. It is very effective in my experience. Next slide. Is just a repeat. There are cultural positives and cultural taboos. Using your title in many countries is very important. So in all your correspondence, all your interaction, you make sure that you emphasize that if you have a master's degree or an advanced degree, a doctorate, that you put that in your signature on emails. You put that in those sorts of things, because that is the cultural thing that they do. If you do not, they will think you're just a regular, in my case, Mr., and that's how they address you and treat you. But once you become Dr. So-and-so, it's a whole different level of interaction and type of communication, because their societies honor advanced educations. That is true in places like the Middle East, the Arab countries, India, East Asia. China, Korea, and Japan have that kind of culture. There are others in certain parts of Europe. It is very strong. In other parts of Europe, it is not, and that's just something I have learned. Taxes and fees are really tricky in that the United States is an exception, and I'm assuming all of you live within the United States. United States taxes all foreign income, with the only exclusion being that you have to be outside of the U.S. for some huge amount of a year. I think it's, I might have it on one of my other slides, but off the top of my head, I think it's 15 days. And so if you are a resident of the United States for 350 days, of more than, if you're a resident of the United States for more than 15 days, you have to pay U.S. taxes on foreign income. That's pretty extreme, because that only gives you 2 weeks of time in the U.S. that counts as being under that limit. And that's why many foreign workers can only take brief trips when they are doing overseas work to the U.S. because it changes their tax status. U.S. taxes are generally higher than some of the countries that I did work in. And so that's something you need to check in if you're going to do foreign work. And there are foreign taxes on income that you can deduct, like VATs, but it is quite a complicated area than what I first naively thought. And so if you do foreign work, you need to check into the tax issues with the Internal Revenue Service. Next slide. Is the partial scientist, which is things that are not really thought of as being in science, but are lucrative or may get you some things. I mentioned the second one, which is teacher and trainer. You can also be a writer of science. I know some people that do this on piecework kind of basis. They let themselves be known by certain publications that do write scientific oriented things. Speaker and presenter. Every once in a while I get asked to give a talk, and particularly if you're going to have to travel overseas, they are going to want, they are all possibly will give you an honorarium. And so you have to decide what you're going to charge for giving a talk. That can be very thought-provoking when it happens. I was asked to give a talk at a scientific conference in Bahrain by Saudi Aramco because they were organizing it and sponsoring it. And they said, well, would you like to come over? And I had been doing some work there, so I thought, well, they said they were going to pay all my expenses. And I said, well, this will just be good advertising to make me available. And I had to open time. And so I was going to get a free trip to Bahrain and stay at a luxury hotel for a week. And then the person that was arranging it said, and what is your speaker's fee? And off the top of my head, I just said $1,000 for a 40-minute talk at the conference. I later learned when I was actually at the conference that because of my background in doing petroleum analysis, I was considered a very high expert. The other, and I was a plenary speaker, one of two. The other plenary speaker that Aramco had hired was that, this was in September, so it was the previous year's announced Nobel Prize winner, a German fellow. He, being who he was, being a Nobel laureate and a hot item at the time, for his 40-minute talk, it was 15,000 euros. So I could have offered a fraction of that, but well above mine, and the Saudis would not have blinked. So that opened my eye to that, and I have been offered that a few times by companies in particular, where they just want you to come and be a speaker. Also, as part of being a speaker is you get toured around the place and you talk to different people. So you're there interacting with people and maybe answering a few questions. They don't want to hire you as a consultant, but they're willing to give you $1,000 or $2,000 for being a visiting speaker and paying all your expenses. And that's another way to make money. Quality auditor is one area that I was versed in from my work at Chevron. And also safety advisor. I had been a safety officer. And so there are other things that you may have that are useful. Those last two are very important in certain parts of the world because they're just coming up to practice in ISO 17025 for quality, and laboratory safety in most of the world is where the U.S. was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And they're trying to come up to speed because particularly if they are starting to go international and have to comply with things like good laboratory practices or ISO 17025, an audit may bring up safety issues and give them non-compliances. And so I have done work for some laboratories overseas, just being either a quality auditor or a safety advisor in those specific areas. Next slide is this is more for some of the members who are, as I am getting to be now, older and thinking they only want to spend part of the time, a little time doing it. Part-time consulting is an option, so you're not aiming to fill up your full day or make you a full income. You have to keep in mind that, that allows you to be more selective with projects, not just in topical area, but companies and clients, so that you start asking questions and making sure that it's a company that you want to work with, because it may turn out that in the future, when they take the work that you are, may tout you as being part of the team. And that is something you have to consider. I have run into that, particularly if some of the work may be applications for regulatory compliance, patent applications, other things like that, where you're dealing with a government agency. If a company hires you to help them in that kind of work, they may say, we hired this individual as help on that, to give them a little more weight in their interaction with that regulatory or governmental agency. And so you have to be a little choosier or find a little bit more out from the company. Nonprofit work is something that I do once in a while. Some consultants do it, and they do it pro bono, and then they use it as a tax write-off. There also are some opportunities where I do work that is essentially not for as big a profit. I will do consulting work pro bono if the group is a nonprofit that I support in the scientific areas, so certain environmental work for certain environmental groups. I had one case a few years ago where a student at a major university was expelled because the professor claimed that she was cheating on an exam because her answer he thought was too technologically advanced or showed too much scientific knowledge to not have been something that she just Googled on her phone while she was taking the exam. I looked at it. It was actually a chemical structure associated with a trivial name. And I said, well, that's a very characteristic trivial name and a very characteristic trivial structure. And from my experience, and was a class of compounds that I have done a lot of work on, I said, from my experience, someone that reads that name may remember the name because it is unique and catchy. And the chemical structure is very symmetrical, so that someone may remember that just because of its symmetry. And she was readmitted to the university. And I only charged her, I forget how many hours I spent on it, but I only charged her like $200. So that's the odds and ends you can do when you have the flexibility and you have a different mindset. Next slide is a review of the intro and basically my closing slide. These are some of the things that I've learned, particularly some in the global area, but also in consulting in general. And with that, I open things up for discussions and questions.
Feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions.
Very good. Let me get a quick question. How most of us who are in this room or who are on this video conference, we're getting kind of old. And one of the problems that I have when I'm trying to talk to people who are scientists or engineers or who are the business people or the lawyers or so forth, is that they're much younger than we are. They're about 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 years younger than us. How do you relate to them? How do you go and how do they relate to you? And is that a problem, or is that not a problem?
It isn't a total major problem. One of the things too is by getting into like the training that I've been doing, both in the U.S. and overseas, and for particularly for companies when they want some training of like the startups that I've done where they needed somebody to teach them how to do size exclusion chromatography and some specific area that they have no expertise in but they know they need. I've interacted with some younger people, and it is an adjustment because their mindset is different, so you can't be as critical as you might be with someone who are our peers going on along. People that are under, let's say now probably 35 or 40, and particularly those in their 30s and 20s, have never been in a situation or rarely in a situation where they get much criticism of performance in school.
Yeah.
And that goes on, and it's now permeated through the university level where professors have to be very careful compared to what they used to. I mean, when we were going to school, a professor I had a professor in grad school that had a bullshit stamp that he would stamp on our exams. And then this guy is a extremely well-known analytical chemist, has won all the awards. So when I tell stories about it to analytical chemists, I give his name out. He couldn't get away with that now. He'd be reported to the university for using a bullshit stamp. And we just took that in stride because all along in our schooling, if we were not performing well, teachers said, you're not performing well. And they criticized us and did those things. That is no longer the norm. And that's probably my first learning over the years is you have to be a lot more diplomatic and careful. So you can't say you do these things. You can bring up sort of like the third person vague form. Well, if someone's doing this and then you point out something similar or analogous to what the person's done incorrectly, said, I would tell them to do it this way, or I would have them do it this way. Or there's something where you're not directly pointing it out to them because they're not used to that, and they don't, and they've developed a mindset where it's not very acceptable. That's probably my number one piece of advice in learning and dealing with people. You have to really work on listening skills. And that's tough for everybody. The number one, I learned it as a supervisor, so I was lucky. When I'm in a situation where I learn, I always pull out something to take notes with, whether it's electronically, paper, pencil, paper, pen, and let the other person speak. I may take notes. They often are helpful, but I let them get whatever they're saying out, and I don't get into that mode where I'm listening to reply. That is when you start filtering things out and using things like body language to send messages, and you may be unaware of that. But it's a good trick to just start being a note taker, getting their message down, thinking about it, asking a few questions, and then moving on to the points you want to make, and those kinds of things. It takes a little more time and effort, but it is more effective because it tones down that you're criticizing or bringing up points that make them feel like they are not knowledgeable. Because some people take it as, well, I've got a bachelor's degree in this and I'm not ignorant. So if you start immediately trying to explain things to them, they get irritated. And you have to do it in another fashion. I don't know, it's a big topical area because, they actually now have courses for people of our age working in companies, or, folks in their 40s and 50s who are supervisors, how to deal with younger employees. It is that much of a bimodal distribution now.
Are there any more questions? Going once, twice, 3 times. Well, thank you very much, John. It was a very good presentation. I really liked it. It was good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It was my pleasure to give it. Everyone should have my contact info. If anyone wants to bring up a discussion or whatever on one of the topics, has a specific question that just popped into mind, you can send me an email, and yeah, I'll be glad to answer those, because this is just literally scratching the surface, but I hope it has been helpful to people, giving them a few ideas and a little more knowledge that's useful in global work and some of the other things I touched on.